He said, "How do you sing like that? Where do you get it from?" I said, "Well, listen."
Elvis Presley had a voice that changed music, but his success didn't come from talent alone. His voice coach watched him closely and helped shape every sound fans loved. Elvis was trained to hide a problem deep in his voice, something that could have ended his career early. What was Elvis secretly trying to cover up? Join us as we uncover the shocking truth. A meeting of chance. A small recording studio sat tucked away on a street in Memphis, far from the tourist attractions and neon lights of Beale Street. Inside the dimly lit space, an elderly man in his late 80s adjusted his glasses and stared at the microphone in front of him. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared to reveal secrets he had kept buried for over 50 years. The walls around him were covered with faded photographs and gold records, memories of a time when music was changing, and he played a silent role in one of the biggest stories in entertainment history. The coach had spent most of his life training singers in classical opera techniques. He grew up in New York City and studied under European masters who taught him the proper way to use the human voice as an instrument. His training focused on breath control, proper posture, and protecting the delicate vocal cords from damage. He worked with opera singers at the Metropolitan Opera House and built a reputation for fixing voices that other coaches had given up on. His methods were strict and disciplined, rooted in centuries of classical tradition that treated the voice with respect and care. Meeting Elvis happened by pure chance in 1964 after a concert at Madison Square Garden. The coach had attended the show with his daughter, who was a devoted fan of the young performer. After the concert ended, they waited by the stage door with hundreds of other fans hoping to see the star. When Elvis finally emerged, surrounded by security guards and handlers, the unexpected happened. The singer stopped directly in front of them, and his daughter gave him a program to sign. In that moment, Elvis coughed heavily, and his face showed a flash of pain that most people missed. The coach noticed something in that cough that troubled him deeply. Years of training had taught him to recognize the signs of vocal strain and damage. He quickly wrote a note on the back of his business card and handed it to one of the security guards. The note simply said that he had heard something concerning in the cough and offered his services if they were ever needed. He expected nothing to come from the gesture and forgot about it within days. 3 weeks later, he received a phone call at his home asking if he could travel to Memphis for a private consultation. The first meeting took place late at night in the studio that would become their regular meeting place. Elvis arrived wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, trying to remain unrecognized, even though few people were around at that hour. The coach had been instructed to tell no one about the meeting, not even his own family. When Elvis removed his sunglasses, the coach could see exhaustion in his eyes. They talked for an hour about the demanding schedule, the constant performances, and the growing difficulty Elvis faced in hitting certain notes that had once come easily to him. The coach asked Elvis to sing several scales and perform basic vocal exercises. What he heard confirmed his worst fears from that night outside Madison Square Garden. The voice that millions of fans loved was showing clear signs of damage and strain. The vocal cords were swollen and inflamed from years of improper technique and overuse. Elvis had never received formal training in how to protect his voice. He had learned to sing by instinct and emotion, pouring everything into each performance without understanding the physical cost. The natural talent that made him a star was now working against him. They agreed to begin regular training sessions twice a week, always late at night when the studio was empty. The coach explained that fixing the damage would take time and patience. Elvis would need to relearn basic techniques and give his voice time to heal between performances. However, there was an immediate problem that complicated everything. The manager had built an empire on the image of Elvis as an unstoppable force, and any hint of weakness or vocal problems could destroy planned tours and recording contracts worth millions of dollars. The coach was told explicitly that their work together must remain completely secret. The training sessions continued for years in that small Memphis studio. The coach would arrive through the back entrance and set up his equipment in the main room. Elvis usually came alone, without the usual entourage that surrounded him during the day. These sessions became a rare moment of privacy in a life that was constantly watched and controlled. They worked on building strength in healthier parts of his voice while allowing injured areas to recover. But even as they made progress, the coach began to notice other troubling signs that went far beyond simple vocal strain. The hidden vocal damage. The damage to Elvis's vocal cords was far more severe than anyone outside the inner circle understood. During their private sessions, the coach discovered that the problems had started much earlier than he thought. Years of performing in small clubs and venues with poor acoustics had forced Elvis to push his voice beyond natural limits just to be heard over loud bands and enthusiastic crowds. He had developed habits that professional opera singers spent years learning to avoid. He would tighten his throat muscles, push air forcefully from his chest, and strain to reach high notes instead of using proper support from his diaphragm. The coach began keeping detailed notes about the condition of Elvis's voice during each session. Some nights the singer would arrive and sound nearly normal, with only slight hoarseness and limited range in the upper register. Other nights were very different. Elvis would walk into the studio, barely able to speak above a whisper. His throat would be so swollen and inflamed that even simple vocal exercises caused visible pain. The coach learned to recognize the pattern. The worst sessions came after major performances or recording dates, where Elvis had pushed himself to deliver the powerful sound that audiences expected from the king of rock and roll. The physical evidence of damage became impossible to ignore. After particularly demanding rehearsals or concerts, Elvis would cough into white handkerchiefs that came away spotted with bright red blood. The coach had seen similar symptoms in opera singers who had suffered serious vocal injuries. The delicate tissue of the vocal cords was tearing under the strain of constant use without proper rest or technique. Each new tear would heal with scar tissue that made the cords less flexible and more prone to future damage. It was a downward spiral that could only end one way without intervention and extended rest. To address the damage and rebuild Elvis's voice on a healthier foundation, the coach designed a comprehensive program. The exercises focused on releasing tension in the throat and jaw, developing strong breath support from the abdomen, and finding easier ways to access different parts of his vocal range. They worked on register transitions that would allow him to move between chest voice and head voice without strain. The coach taught him to think of his voice as a precious gift that needed gentle care rather than a tool to be used until it broke. Progress came slowly but steadily during the weeks when Elvis could follow the program consistently. However, the demands of his career made consistent training nearly impossible. Tours were scheduled months in advance, with dozens of shows packed into short time periods. Recording sessions were booked based on contract obligations rather than the condition of his voice. Television appearances and movie soundtracks added even more pressure to perform, regardless of how he felt. The coach repeatedly advised taking extended breaks to allow proper healing, but those recommendations were dismissed by management as consequential. The empire built around Elvis required constant output, and the machine could not stop for something as seemingly minor as a sore throat. The coach discovered that Elvis was losing his voice completely for days at a time, between public appearances. He would finish a run of concerts and then be unable to speak normally for nearly a week. The inflammation and swelling were so severe that even casual conversation became painful. During these recovery periods, Elvis would communicate through written notes or whispered words. The coach visited him during these times and applied warm compresses to his throat while teaching gentle humming exercises that promoted healing without adding strain. They both knew that these recovery periods were barely enough to address the surface damage before the next round of performances began. The exercises became increasingly focused on compensation rather than healing. The coach taught Elvis tricks to mask the limitations caused by damaged tissue. He learned to modify vowel sounds to avoid hitting injured spots directly. He practiced sliding into high notes from below, rather than attacking them with force. The coach showed him how to use microphone technique to amplify softer passages so he did not have to push constantly for volume. These adaptations allowed Elvis to continue performing at a level that satisfied audiences, but they were temporary solutions that did not address the underlying deterioration. The coach felt uncomfortable about his role in helping Elvis hide the truth from the world and from himself. The prescription pill connection. The medical interventions began innocently enough with standard treatments that many professional performers used occasionally. A doctor who traveled with the tour would examine Elvis before shows and prescribe anti-inflammatory medications to reduce swelling in his throat. These early treatments seemed reasonable and were similar to what athletes might use for injuries. The coach attended some of these medical examinations and initially felt relieved that professional health care was being added to the vocal training program. However, the nature of these treatments changed rapidly as the demands on Elvis continued to increase without adequate rest. The injections started during a particularly grueling Las Vegas residency that required 2 shows per night for weeks on end. Elvis arrived at the studio one afternoon, with his voice totally gone after performing the previous night. He could hardly talk and showed obvious signs of panic about the evening shows that were already sold out. The doctor arrived within an hour carrying a medical bag. The coach watched as cortisone was injected directly into the muscles surrounding Elvis's vocal cords. The transformation was startling, and at the same time distributing. Within 30 minutes, the swelling decreased noticeably, and Elvis could speak normally again. By showtime, he was able to sing with nearly his full range and power restored. The coach instantly understood that this was a dangerous development. Cortisone was a powerful steroid that reduced inflammation artificially, but did nothing to heal the underlying damage. In fact, repeated cortisone injections could weaken tissue and make it more susceptible to injury, meaning that the temporary relief came at a significant long-term cost. When the coach expressed these concerns privately, he was told that the shows could not be canceled and that thousands of fans were depending on Elvis to perform. The financial implications of canceling even a single Las Vegas show were enormous. The injections became a regular part of the pre-show routine during extended performance runs. Meanwhile, other medications were added to address the side effects and complications that arose from the cortisone treatments. As time passed, Elvis began experiencing sleep disturbances and anxiety, common reactions to regular steroid use. Doctors prescribed pills to help him sleep after shows when his body was still flooded with adrenaline and synthetic hormones. Different pills were given to help him wake up and feel alert for afternoon rehearsals. Pain medications were added when his throat became too sore, even with the anti-inflammatory treatments. The coach watched this pharmaceutical expansion with growing alarm, but felt powerless to intervene in medical decisions made by licensed physicians. The vocal training sessions became complicated by the effects of various medications on Elvis's body and voice. Some days he would arrive at the studio in an altered state, either too drowsy or unnaturally energetic. His ability to focus on technical exercises varied wildly depending on what combination of medications he had taken that day. The coach tried to adapt the training to accommodate these fluctuations, but it became increasingly difficult to make real progress. The entire approach had shifted from healing and proper technique to managing symptoms and maintaining the ability to perform regardless of the cost. The coach began to see connections between the medical treatments and Elvis's overall health decline. The constant cycle of steroids, pain medications, sleeping pills, and stimulants was having a visible effect. Elvis's weight fluctuated, and his mood swings became more obvious. The youthful energy that had defined his early career was replaced by a dependence on medical interventions just to get through each day. The coach realized that the vocal damage was no longer just an isolated problem. It had become the entry point for a much more dangerous pattern of prescription pill use that was spiraling beyond control. The relationship between vocal strain and medication dependence created a vicious cycle that fed on itself. The medications provided temporary relief, but prevented real healing. Without healing, the vocal damage worsened. Worse damage required stronger medical interventions. The coach tried multiple times to break this cycle by proposing extended rest periods or reduced performance schedules. Each time, these suggestions were rejected by management, with talks about contractual obligations and financial commitments. The coach felt trapped in a situation where his training expertise was being used to enable a destructive pattern. The pyramid of lies. The deception required to maintain Elvis's public image as a powerful vocalist became elaborate as his vocal condition deteriorated. Concert performances were structured to hide limitations and weaknesses. The setlist for each show was designed to start with easier songs that required less vocal demand while Elvis warmed up on stage. The most challenging numbers were placed in the middle of the show, when his voice had loosened up, but before fatigue set in. Slower ballads were strategically positioned near the end when his energy was fading. Working with the musical director, the coach arranged this sequence in a way that seemed natural to audiences. Sound engineering became a crucial part of the illusion. Backup singers were positioned closer to certain microphones and mixed louder in the overall sound during songs with high notes that Elvis could no longer hit reliably. The audience heard a full, rich sound and assumed it was all coming from the star at center stage. The coach attended several concerts and stood in different parts of the venue to check whether the vocal weaknesses were noticeable. From most seats, the careful mixing and arrangement created a convincing performance. Only those standing very close to the stage or listening through professional equipment could detect the gaps filled by other voices. Recording sessions employed even more sophisticated techniques to create the illusion of a healthy voice. Multiple takes were recorded for each song, sometimes dozens of attempts at hard passages. The best moments from each take were spliced together in the studio to create a final version that sounded smooth and effortless. On particularly bad days when Elvis's voice was too damaged for any usable takes, entire sessions were canceled and rescheduled. The official explanation was always related to creative decisions or scheduling conflicts, never the truth about vocal inability. There were close calls during live performances when the carefully constructed facade nearly collapsed. The coach remembered one concert where Elvis's voice cracked badly on a sustained high note during an early song. The mistake was obvious to everyone in the arena. Without missing a beat, Elvis made a joke about the microphone being broken and asked for a replacement while the band vamped. The delay gave him a few moments to recover his composure and spray numbing medication on his throat backstage. He returned and finished the show without another obvious error, and the crowd laughed off the incident as a minor technical glitch rather than a symptom of serious problems. Television appearances required even more planning because they would be watched by millions and potentially replayed for years. The coach worked with producers to ensure that Elvis was scheduled for filming during times of day when his voice typically performed best. Songs were selected based on their technical demands and his current abilities. Rehearsals were limited to preserve vocal energy for the actual recording. In some cases, portions of the performance were pre-recorded in a studio under optimal conditions and then matched with live footage. This technique allowed Elvis to appear to be singing live when he was actually lip-syncing to his pre-recorded vocals. The coach taught Elvis specific performance tricks to disguise moments when his voice was failing during a live show. He learned to pull the microphone away from his mouth during passages he could not sing, making it look like a dramatic gesture, while the backup singers covered the missing vocals. He developed ways to alter melodies, substituting easier notes for difficult ones in a manner that seemed like spontaneous artistic interpretation. Hand signals were arranged with the band so Elvis could communicate key changes or tempo adjustments that would make songs more manageable for his damaged voice. These adaptations became second nature over time. The coach was instructed never to speak with journalists or acknowledge publicly that he was working with Elvis. When music critics mentioned that Elvis sounded different or seemed to struggle with certain songs, these reviews were dismissed as the opinions of people who did not understand his artistic evolution. The official narrative maintained that Elvis was in complete control of his instrument and making deliberate choices about how he used his voice. The truth remained hidden behind layers of careful management and manufactured explanations that protected the valuable brand above all other considerations. Sadly, that was a heavy secret to carry for long. A warning for the next generation. The breaking point came during a late-night session in the Memphis studio that had become their private sanctuary. Elvis arrived looking exhausted and defeated in a way the coach had never seen before. His voice was nearly gone after 3 consecutive nights of performances, and there were still 4 more shows scheduled that week. The coach began their usual routine of gentle exercises and warming techniques, but Elvis stopped him mid-exercise and asked a simple question, one that the coach had not expected. Elvis wanted to know whether continuing to perform was worth the permanent damage being done. The coach wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to cancel everything and take 6 months off to heal properly. Instead, he continued with the exercises and helped prepare Elvis for that night's show. After that moment, the coach felt he had made the greatest mistake ever. The hesitation haunted him for decades afterward. He knew he possessed the expertise to clearly explain the long-term consequences of the path they were on, but he failed to. He could have insisted more forcefully on proper rest and healing. He could have refused to continue training that enabled the cover-up of serious health problems. Instead, he had prioritized his role as an employee over his responsibility as a healthcare professional. The guilt grew heavier as years passed, and news of Elvis's declining health became more public. When the singer passed away in 1977, the coach felt partially responsible for not taking a stronger stand during those crucial years when intervention might have made a difference. The voice coach spent the following decades in relative obscurity, working with students and occasionally consulting for recording artists. He never spoke publicly about his work with Elvis and declined all interview requests from journalists and biographers. Friends and family knew he had worked with famous performers, but did not understand the weight he carried from those experiences. At first, the silence felt necessary, a way to honor the privacy he had promised and to avoid exploiting his connection to a tragedy. However, as more time passed, the silence began to feel like complicity in a larger pattern of exploitation that went on in the entertainment industry. The decision to finally speak up came after the coach witnessed similar patterns with younger performers. He saw talented singers being pushed to tour constantly without adequate rest. He watched as social media and streaming services created pressure for endless content and appearances. He noticed the same warning signs of vocal damage in artists who were barely into their 20s. Platforms and technologies had changed, but the main problem remained. The entertainment industry still prioritized profit and productivity over the health and longevity of its performers. So, breaking his silence felt like a moral obligation to warn the next generation. The coach acknowledges his role in enabling a system that ultimately failed Elvis. By helping Elvis continue singing while injured, he participated in a deception that prevented honest conversations about rest and recovery. The training techniques he taught were designed to protect damaged vocal cords, but they also allowed performances that should never have happened. The vocal coaching became part of a larger group, all working to extract maximum value from a human being whose body was falling apart. Looking back, the coach recognizes that everyone involved convinced themselves they were helping when they were actually enabling destruction. The warning the coach offers now focuses on the human cost of fame and the responsibility of everyone involved in an artist's career. He emphasizes that talent is not unlimited and bodies require care and rest to function properly. Vocal cords can be permanently damaged by overuse, just like any other part of the body. No amount of money or fame is worth sacrificing long-term health. The coach urges young performers to insist on adequate rest between tours and to walk away from commitments that demand too much. He encourages them to work closely with medical professionals who put long-term health above strict schedule adherence. He wants them to truly understand that saying no to certain opportunities is sometimes the most important decision they can make. When discussing the moments he could have stepped in more forcefully, the coach's voice shook with sadness and guilt. He expresses regret not for the training techniques themselves, which were sound and proven, but for applying them in service of a schedule that was fundamentally unhealthy and emotionally draining. The emotional weight of the confession is visible as the elderly coach finishes recording his statement. Now, he can only hope that sharing this story will create space for different conversations in the music industry about sustainable careers and artist welfare. He believes that Elvis's talent could have sustained a much longer career if the approach had been different, if rest had been valued as much as performance, if health had been the priority instead of an obstacle to be managed. The lessons from those Memphis studio sessions decades ago remain painfully relevant. The coach's confession is not about blame, but responsibility. It stands as a final reminder that great voices are still human bodies. If the industry listens this time, the cost paid by Elvis may help protect others, turning regret into warning and warning into lasting change for generations yet to come.